Hello and welcome to the JSA studio. I'm your host, as always, Nathan, and today I'm coming at you with the Week 6 predictions. We're going to go game by game in the Big Ten and predict a winner for every Big Ten game. But before we go ahead and get started, it's at this point I am going to ask you to like, comment, and subscribe. It would really help me out if you did. And now with the intro done and out of the way, there's only one thing left to do, and that is to get started by starting with Michigan State and Oregon. Michigan State last week had some opportunities. They were a little bit banged up. Marsh, the wide receiver, was not 100%. And even though this team, I thought, played better than the final score indicated, they were most likely not going to win that game. They had several opportunities deep in Ohio State territory that didn't go anywhere, really. They decided not to kick field goals a couple of times. That was interesting, in my opinion. They had some turnovers. All around, it just wasn't great last week, but they were moving the ball against what, in my opinion, is a very good Ohio State defense. And I believe Oregon's defense is significantly worse than Ohio State's. I think Ohio State's one of the 5 best. I think Oregon's defense is above average. I don't think it's a good unit by any stretch of the imagination. However, Oregon offensively against this Michigan State defense that has dramatically exceeded my expectations for this team. Nevertheless, Oregon's offense versus this defense is still a bit of a mismatch. I don't really see a whole lot of a scenario where Michigan State is going to be able to consistently slow down this Oregon team. Now, can they get some stops? Yes, especially early on in the game. However, I think Oregon kind of got their shit together the first 2 weeks. They didn't look great. And then they played Oregon State, and I think they kind of put themselves together. And I think they are getting close to the team that I thought they would be entering this season. And more importantly than that, right now, there is just a talent and, more importantly, a discipline difference between these two teams. And because of that, I do think Michigan State is going to cover that 23.5 points. I do think we're also going to hit the over as well. However, I think Oregon is just clearly the better team right now. So I've got Oregon winning by the final score of 41-14. Next game up is UCLA versus Penn State. The line for this game is 27.5. Penn State is favored by almost 4 touchdowns. The over-under is 44.5. Penn State has been a dramatically inconsistent football team, especially offensively, but even defensively, they've been inconsistent at times this year. UCLA, this game has basically nothing to do with you. You are a very bad football team heading maybe in a positive direction. I don't like the head coach. I didn't like running Chip Kelly out of town to begin with. But, then you hired a guy that was, for all intents and purposes, a legacy hire. He has connections to the university. And generally speaking, the only time that's really ever worked out was Michigan with Jim Harbaugh. And I guess you could argue Jonathan Smith at Oregon State. Outside of that, the legacy hires don't work out very often. I don't like doing that, to be honest with you, but teams continue to do it. Either way, I don't think this game will be particularly close. I have Penn State not covering, but getting pretty close with 35 points, UCLA with 10. I think this game is going to be pretty much over by the time we get halfway through the third quarter. Moving on to Purdue at Wisconsin. This is a game that has a bigger line than I anticipated. Wisconsin is minus 14 in this game. They are favored by 2 touchdowns over Purdue. The over-under is set at a fairly odd number as well with 46.5. Fact of the matter is that I thought Wisconsin actually looked really good last week, especially in the first half. The second half, USC kind of turned it on, and then the talent kind of overwhelmed Wisconsin. But I do think that this is a better team than Purdue, I should say. I was going to say a program headed in the right direction, but I don't know if I believe that or not. I think you're in a better direction than Purdue is, certainly, but the bar for that is so low, it is a tripping hazard in hell. Meanwhile, Ryan Walters is over here limbo dancing with Lucifer. So, I don't think this is particularly going to be all that good of a game. I think Wisconsin is going to get up relatively big by 3 touchdowns or maybe 3 scorers or something like that. And then I think they're going to kind of take the foot off the gas a little bit and allow Purdue to get back into it. Final score for me in this game, Purdue 21, Wisconsin 35. Moving on to our first quote-unquote big matchup of the week. Ohio State is playing Iowa. I don't think this is the week that you can finally say that Ohio State is playing somebody. If you've been watching my videos on Mondays, I do not have a high opinion of this Iowa football team. I don't think they're very good. I think the defense has taken a massive step backwards from previous years, and I think the offense is still exactly what the offense has been. It's just that they are now able to actually run the football because they have a running back worth something, at least. Previously, they haven't even really had a running back worth anything, in my opinion. For what it's also worth, I do think Iowa's offensive line is better than it has been the past few years as well. They still have massive problems at the quarterback position. Cade McNamara is not a good football player. He never particularly was either, even at his time at Michigan. I was not sad to see him transfer. Ohio State, meanwhile, took care of business against Michigan State. Defense looked surprisingly porous. However, I was not equipped to deal with what moved the ball for Michigan State. So I don't particularly think Ohio State is going to have a hard time stopping this offense. I think this is going to be a Big Ten sort of bully ball sort of game, and Ohio State is significantly better at that than Iowa. And because of that, I am going to predict Ohio State to win this game by well over the line. I think Ohio State covers easily. I think this Iowa team is really going to struggle. I think they're probably going to get gifted with a turnover in Ohio State territory, and that leads to 3 points. Outside of that, I don't particularly see this offense being able to move the ball really at all. Final score for this one, Ohio State 31, Iowa 6. Next game on the docket here, Indiana at Northwestern. This is a game that is potentially more interesting than is being talked about. I don't think Northwestern is a hapless football team. I don't think they're good, but I don't think they're completely unable to pull off an upset against a team that honestly doesn't have that much of a talent advantage over Northwestern. Trap game is not a good sort of analogy for what this game might be, because Indiana isn't looking ahead to next week. They might be looking ahead to 2 weeks when they take Nebraska down to Bloomington. But this isn't a traditional trap game because the game isn't being played next week. So you can kind of distance yourself from it mentally and just be like, okay, focus on this week. Then we have a bye week to help us prepare for Nebraska. Also, this isn't a letdown game, so to speak, because they weren't playing a big game either. I just think this game is going to be a little bit tighter than you might anticipate. I think the line is just about right, but if you've been watching Indiana, this is a high quality football team. And you might be anticipating a blowout if you have been watching Indiana and you have been watching Northwestern. I just don't see that in this game. Call it a gut feeling, call it whatever you want to, but I think this is going to be a lower scoring game. And Vegas agrees with that assessment. Indiana is only favored by 14 points, and the over-under is set very low at 41.5, meaning effectively that they think this game is going to be just about what I think this game is going to be. And that's a game where Indiana covers and hits the over, but just slightly. The final score prediction for this game is Indiana 28, Northwestern 13. I just think this is going to be a game that Indiana is going to look at and just be like, okay, I just got to get through this game. You know what I mean? Next game up is a sneaky good game, and that is Rutgers versus Nebraska. And this is a game that might end up being actually pretty interesting. I do think Northwestern is better equipped to deal with Rutgers than Washington was. I think Nebraska has a better offensive line than Washington, and I think Nebraska has a better defensive line than Washington. Also, Washington still wins that game if they have a kicker worth a damn. Okay, their kicker missed 3 relatively easy field goals. If he makes one of them, that game goes to overtime and Washington probably wins. If he makes 2 out of 3, which is 66%, which is below average for college kickers, then Washington wins in regulation. Okay, so I think that game is going to trick some people into thinking maybe Rutgers is a little bit better than they are. They are a very good football team that is very, very well coached and has a real chance to get to 7 wins this year. However, that might be their ceiling, 7 or 8 wins this year. Nebraska, I think, is a team that kind of just needs to start putting quality wins under their belt and start looking towards next year. I've said that very consistently about Nebraska. This is a team that is playing for next year, not this year. But beating this Rutgers team this year, undefeated Rutgers team, I might add, it would be a quality win for Nebraska and a moment that you can look at and say, hey, that's an objectively good football team and we beat them, which is not something you can say about the rest of Nebraska's wins this year. Nebraska is favored by 6.5. I have them covering, just simply because I think they're going to win by a touchdown. Rutgers 17, Nebraska 24 is my final prediction for this game. I just think Rutgers is too one-dimensional on offense, and I think Nebraska's defense is going to be good enough to shut down the run game. Or shut down isn't the correct term. Limit the run game, because Monangai is still going to break some runs. He's still probably going to have north of 100 yards, but I don't think it's going to be enough for Rutgers to win this game. Oh boy. Moving on to maybe the biggest game of the weekend in the Big Ten. Michigan versus Washington, a rematch of the national championship game. And the line for a top 10 Michigan team heading on the road to a 3-2 Washington team that lost to Rutgers last week is Washington minus 1.5. And that line smells awful. That line stinks. And it doesn't just stink, it reeks of Vegas knows some shit that we do not. And last week, I ignored the stench of a couple of lines and got burned by it. Most notably, Rutgers beating this Washington team. I looked at that and I said, no, I don't believe that. I think Washington is a quality football team that lost to a good, objectively, Washington State team. Okay, turns out Washington State's probably not as good as I thought they were, and Washington is probably worse than I thought they were. However, if Washington plays an average football game, they beat Rutgers. They don't win by a lot, but they still beat Rutgers, and Rutgers is significantly better than I thought they were. The fact remains that Michigan cannot throw the football. They will most likely not have the ability to get to 100 yards passing in this game. Alex Orji is not the explosive athlete that people think he is. He just isn't. He has not been an effective runner at all this year, really. And more importantly than that, he sucks at the read option. He's horrible at it. I don't know if he has made the correct read on a read option like once this entire season. Now, I will also say this. I was all aboard the Alex Orji hype train to start the year. Okay? But I don't think I was correct. I'm not dumb enough to stick to my guns, so to speak, on this. Alex Orji probably should have been the starting quarterback because the offense does look more competent with the threat of a run game at the quarterback position. However, he still can't throw the football. And say what we want to about Davis Warren, he's very clearly the better passer than Alex Orji right now. And I have a sneaking suspicion that part of Michigan's game plan in this game is going to be throwing the football more. Because Washington's defense is not that good, and their run defense is particularly suspect. That's why Rutgers dominated on the ground last week, okay? So Michigan might be able to get away with the ground and pound 80 yards passing in this game, which is why I think it's going to be close, and that's why the line is still, so close. If this was a neutral field, it's very likely Michigan would be slightly favored. However, the fact of the reality remains, if Washington can make the run game difficult for Michigan to get more than 3 yards a carry, they're going to win this game. Okay? That's the reality of the situation. And it honestly shouldn't be that hard. I was kind of perplexed with USC's game plan against Michigan. I thought that was maybe one of the worst coaching blunders of the college football season. The fact that USC decided to come out and try to establish the run, which was never going to work. And then defensively, they decided to play base defense instead of load the box, which again, didn't make any goddamn sense at all. All that being said, we've talked about Washington defense versus Michigan offense. Let's talk about the flip side. Washington offense versus Michigan defense. Washington can run the football. They're a real football team when it comes to running. Coleman, their running back, is very good. I like him a lot. I think the offensive line, though not as good as it was last year because it was arguably the best offensive line in the country last year, is still well above average. And in the passing game, Will Rogers has been relatively consistent and been, in my opinion, pretty good. Like, I think he's been solid. I don't think he's been elite or anything, but he has been good. He's probably the second best quarterback Michigan has played this year behind Miller Moss. And Washington does have some pretty good players at the other skill positions as well. This is not a team that's unbeatable for Michigan by any stretch of the imagination. Will Rogers has not thrown an interception this year, but to me, against a Michigan defense that is very good at forcing turnovers, all that means is that Michigan is going to get at least one turnover in this game, as Will Rogers is due to throw an interception. This is a 50-50 game for me, but I am unwilling to ignore this week the stench that is that line. Mainly because I think Washington is in a very similar situation to what Michigan was during the USC game. Washington is playing for the pride of their football program because they lost to Rutgers last week. I think they got caught looking ahead. I think they're going to come out. I think they're going to play well. And I think they're going to win. I really do. I think it's close. I think if Michigan can get a break here or there with a turnover or a big punt return or a block or something like that, then I think Michigan could win this game. However, Washington, I think, is more consistent than Michigan offensively. I think they have a play caller defensively that isn't going to gift teams first downs to extend drives. And also, there's a fair bit of overlap from this Washington team to last year. I think they're going to be extraordinarily motivated to get this W for the team. And I've got Washington winning 24-20. This could go either way, but that line ultimately was the deciding factor to me because I refuse to let Vegas, take one over me again. Last game of the week is USC at Minnesota, as Illinois and Maryland have byes this week. So USC at Minnesota. The line is Minnesota +8, which is somewhat interesting, but I think the fact remains that USC is still not prepared to play Big Ten bully ball. That being said, Minnesota is not good enough for that to matter. in my opinion. The line for this game is Minnesota +8, the over-under 49.5. I think they're going to be well under that line, and I don't think USC is going to cover either. I've predicted this game to be USC 21, Minnesota 14. But that's just me, and what do I know? I'm just some asshole on the internet giving you his opinion. So at this point, I'd like to remind you to like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and if you disagree with me at any point, go ahead and drop a comment down in the comment section below. And now with the outro done and out of the way, there's only one thing left to say, and that's that I'll see you next time.